Gathered at our usual party spot by the river, we were deep in the revelry of the night when an unexpected visitor emerged from the woods. His presence was unsettling, his words cryptic. "You gotta watch yourself down here," he cautioned, his eyes scanning our group. When pressed for his identity, he simply replied, "I'm nobody." His eerie demeanor sent a chill through us, prompting us to dismiss him with a terse directive to leave. Days passed, and the tranquility of that evening was shattered by a horrifying incident. A girl, unaware of the hidden danger, swung joyfully from the rope into the river, only to be ensnared by fishing hooks maliciously placed beneath the water's surface. The hooks tore into her flesh, leaving her severely injured and traumatized. As the shock of the incident settled, we learned more about the mysterious man from that fateful night. Despite his unsettling demeanor, he was merely a local resident, known for his eccentric behavior and affinity for alcohol. His warnings, we discovered, were not baseless. He had been trying to alert us to the presence of a dangerous, inbred family that dwelled nearby. Further revelations sent shivers down our spines. The family he had spoken of had a history of violence and depravity. Just a year prior, they had brutally attacked a young man with a log, leaving him grievously injured. In a separate, harrowing incident, they had abducted a girl at gunpoint, taking her on a terrifying joyride before she managed to escape. The realization of the danger we had narrowly avoided dawned upon us. The idyllic party spot we once frequented was now tainted by the specter of violence and malevolence. We made a unanimous decision never to return, the memory of that night and its aftermath serving as a stark reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of our carefree gatherings. The events of that fateful night still haunt me, replaying in my mind like a horror movie. It was a dark and quiet evening, typical for our rural home, nestled far from the city's hustle and bustle. My mother and I were just settling in for the night when a loud knock shattered the peaceful silence, sending a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, unsure of who would be calling at such a late hour. Sensing my unease, my mother rose to investigate, her footsteps echoing in the hallway as she made her way to the door. I followed closely behind, my heart pounding in my chest. As my mother opened the door, a chill ran down my spine. Standing before us was a man, his face obscured by the darkness. He spoke in a smooth, reassuring tone, claiming to be a businessman looking to promote American-made products. However, something about his demeanor seemed off, sending a wave of unease washing over me. As the man continued to speak, my mother's expression hardened. She was not one to be easily swayed by smooth talkers. Sensing her skepticism, the man reached into his bag and pulled out a small container of Clorox, offering it to my mother as a sample. It was then that I noticed something peculiar. There were 5 other men sitting in a van parked nearby, their eyes fixed on us. Alarmed by the sight, my mother quickly ushered me inside, her voice trembling slightly. She told me to find my phone as we had no landline, while she kept an eye on the men outside. I fumbled through drawers and cabinets, my hands shaking with fear. Unable to locate my phone, I grabbed the nearest object for protection, a small kitchen knife, and positioned myself near the door, ready to defend my family if necessary. Outside, my mother confronted the men, her voice firm and unwavering. She demanded that they leave immediately, threatening to call the police if they refused. The men hesitated for a moment, their faces hidden in the shadows, before hastily retreating to their van and speeding off into the night. For a while, we thought that was the end of it. But 2 months later, our sense of security was shattered once again. My mother discovered a stranger, a bearded man, leaving garbage bags by our back door. When confronted, he uttered those chilling words, "This is for your little girl." My mother's blood ran cold as she inspected the contents of the bags, garbage, dirty clothing, and empty tampon containers. It was clear that this was no innocent act of littering. Someone was trying to send us a message filled with malice and intent. These events have left a lasting impact on me, a reminder that evil lurks in the most unexpected of places. It's a lesson I will never forget, a lesson that has taught me to always be vigilant and to trust my instincts. The world is a dangerous place, but with courage and determination, we can overcome even the most unsettling of circumstances. When I was 7 years old, while leaving school, I fell for a stranger's deceitful line. "Your mom asked me to pick you up and take you to her coffee shop." Trustingly, I got into the back seat of his car and fastened my seatbelt, eager to see my mom. Curiosity bubbled within me, and I asked him his name, but he remained silent, sending a chill down my spine. It was then that a wave of fear washed over me, realizing I had made a grave mistake. Nervously fidgeting, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. The stranger, noticing my distress, opened the glove compartment and handed me some comic books, attempting to calm me down. However, my heart continued to race with anxiety because he had promised to take me to my mom's coffee shop, and we were heading in the opposite direction. As my cries intensified, the man grew visibly frustrated, his attention divided between my hysterics and the road. Suddenly, he narrowly missed hitting a woman crossing the street, causing him to slam on the brakes. The force of the abrupt stop sent the comic books flying from my lap, scattering across the floor of the car. In a moment of panic, I unclasped my seatbelt to retrieve the comics. Angrily, the man yelled at me to get back in my seat and shut up. His harsh tone sent shivers down my spine, intensifying my fear, and I began crying even harder. Whether it was the sound of my sobbing or the close call with the pedestrian, the man seemed to change his mind. Distractedly flipping through the pages of the comics, I realized we had arrived back at my school. Without a word, the man instructed me to get out, change of plans, leave the books. Without hesitation, I flung the door open and sprinted back inside the safety of my school. Upon returning to the office, I found my mom already there, tears streaming down her face. Surrounding her were a few police officers, my principal, and my teacher. Recounting the harrowing experience to them, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. My mom had just arrived at the school when I mistakenly got into the stranger's car. Panicked, she immediately called the police while sending my uncle, who was with her, to follow the man's car. In the aftermath of the incident, my family didn't dwell on it, but it left a lasting impact. From that day on, strict measures were put in place to ensure my safety. If anyone other than my mom had to pick me up, I had to wait in the office until they arrived, providing identification for verification. Reflecting on that terrifying experience, I shudder to think what could have happened if the man had succeeded in his sinister plan. It remains the most frightening moment of my life, one that I will never forget. When I think back to that night, it's like I'm right there again, feeling the terror that gripped me as a teenager. I was about 15, just a kid, really, when everything changed in an instant. It started like any other night. I was alone in my bedroom, nestled in the safety of my home, drifting off to sleep. Then, out of nowhere, the peace was shattered by the sound of relentless banging on the door. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just the wind or my imagination running wild. But the banging grew louder, more urgent, until it was impossible to ignore. Before I could even make sense of what was happening, I felt a rough hand grab my hair, yanking me from my bed. I was face to face with a stranger, a knife glinting in the darkness, and a blinding flashlight aimed right at me. Fear paralyzed me as they demanded to know where we kept our valuables, dragging me through the house, room to room, searching for anything of worth. In those frantic moments, my mind raced. Where was my family? Why weren't they home yet? The fear for their safety added to the chaos in my head. When I managed to ask the time, hoping for some relief, the answer sent a chill down my spine. It was late, too late for my family to still be out. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. We were all in danger. I'd seen their faces, heard their names. In movies, that meant the worst was yet to come. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited, helpless and terrified for what they might do next. Finally, they ordered me back to my room, warning me not to call the police until they were done. Alone in my room, I frantically searched for my phone, my lifeline, only to find it missing. With my heart pounding in my chest, I knew I had to act. I made a split-second decision and jumped from my balcony to my neighbor's roof, desperate for help. Thankfully, my neighbor was there, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They called the police, who arrived just in time. The intruders were caught, and my family returned safely, unaware of the nightmare I had endured. But even with the happy ending, the trauma of that night has never left me. It's a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, especially in a place like Mexico, where stories like mine are all too common. It's an experience that has left me with lasting anxiety, a constant reminder of the worst and scariest night of my life. This event is etched in my memory like a fresh wound, even though it happened so long ago. I was just a 4-year-old child, innocently playing on the trampoline with my 6-year-old brother and my 9-year-old female cousin at her house. Suddenly, out of the bushes behind her home, a man in his 40s of Asian descent emerged. He asked if he could join us on the trampoline, and though we were filled with unease, we remained silent. Despite our hesitation, he climbed onto the trampoline, displaying strange behavior. He kept his knees bent and pretended not to know how to jump, frequently falling near or on top of my cousin. After a few unsettling minutes, he enticed us with promises of food and candy at his house, and against our better judgment, we followed him there. I realize now how foolish it was, but we were just young children, easily swayed by the promise of treats. He led us inside and claimed to have games in the basement, luring us further down the stairs. Suddenly, the door slammed shut and locked behind us. It was then that my brother and I realized we were alone in this man's basement. The creepy man and my cousin were nowhere to be found. We scanned the room, taking in the eerie sight of a card table with Chinese playing cards, a row of about 4 twin-sized beds against the wall, and graphic pictures plastered everywhere. Panic set in when we heard my cousin's piercing scream, followed by sounds of a struggle, then what seemed like running and the creepy man shouting after her as she fled out the front door. My brother and I sat frozen in fear, the silence of the basement weighing heavily on us, with no sign of anyone returning through the door or from upstairs. Hours passed before we finally heard the voices of 2 men descending the stairs. We dared not make a sound, consumed by the fear of the unknown. When the door finally opened, relief flooded over us as 2 police officers stood before us, their presence a beacon of safety in the darkness of that basement. We rushed into their arms, tears streaming down our faces as they reassured us that we were now safe. The police explained how they had found us. My cousin had managed to break free from the man's grasp and had bravely fled for help, flagging down a passing police car. She recounted the horrifying ordeal to the officers, leading them to where my brother and I were being held against our will. Her courage and quick thinking saved us from what could have been a much darker fate. She was our hero, and her actions that day will forever be etched in my heart. The trauma of that experience haunted me for years, manifesting in recurring nightmares and repressed memories that plagued my sleep. The vivid dreams would replay the events of that day, down to the smallest details, the colors of the walls and floors, the musty smell of the basement, and the overwhelming feeling of anxiety that consumed me. It's only now, almost 15 years later, that I'm beginning to gain control over my anxiety without the need for medication.